When Barron Trump walked into a high-end restaurant, he didn't expect his MAGA hat to spark a public showdown. What happened next shocked the manager and left an entire city talking. A crisp fall evening in Manhattan made the city shimmer under the streetlights. After a long afternoon meeting, Barron Trump treated himself to a quiet lunch. He chose to unwind from his day at Bistro La Liberté, a high-end French restaurant known for its blend of sophistication and exclusivity. The tables bustled with New York's elites, actors, media moguls, and hedge fund executives, all looking to have a slow evening. The restaurant had long been a staple of the city's elite group. Tonight, like most nights, it was a place where conversations about upcoming elections, investment strategies, and the latest scandals filled the air. However, when Barron Trump walked in, a hush fell over the entire restaurant, and the maitre d' had to look up. Dressed in a sleek black coat, he would have blended in easily with the high-status profile already in the bar despite his stature. But one thing stood out: the bright red MAGA hat perched on his head. Barron wore the hat with ease, the way one would wear comfortable apparel like a neck scarf or dinner gloves, not intending to provoke any audience, but simply expressing a part of himself. Barron didn't notice the glances at first. A few staff members whispered in a corner, and a man was nudging at his wife. Despite his down-to-earth approach, some murmured in disbelief. A few subtly opened their cameras, expecting something to unfold. The hat was a political statement, and if anyone, the former president's son was expected to know not to wear it to a casual dinner. The manager, a man in his mid-40s with brown hair, emerged from the back of the restaurant. A former chef-turned-restaurateur, he had often encountered moments that forced political nuances and conversations on him and wanted his restaurant to be a free zone. To him, this was a moment of principle. "Excuse me," Richard said, stepping before Barron as he approached the hostess stand. His voice was steady but sharp. Barron looked up from the menu in his hands and raised a brow. "Yes?" The manager gestured toward the hat. "I need you to remove that. Political statements aren't allowed in this establishment," he said, loud enough to draw attention. Barron looked up, surprised but not rattled. A few dinner guests stopped eating to listen. Some sipped their wine, waiting to see what would happen next. "Is there a dress code that prohibits hats?" he replied calmly. The manager hesitated, his gaze still sharp with disdain. "Not exactly, but..." "So it's just this hat that's a problem?" Barron asked, his tone calm but firm. A woman from a nearby table scoffed. "What a load of crap," she muttered to her partner. "This isn't about the dress code. He knows exactly what he's doing." "It's about respect," the manager insisted, gesturing vaguely toward the exit. "This establishment prides itself on being a welcoming space. That hat," he pointed toward the red cap, "represents division. It makes people uncomfortable, and we want this to be a neutral ground for all our guests." Barron sighed tiredly, placed the menu back on the stand, and weighed his options. He only wanted to enjoy a quiet dinner tonight. No political motive supported his appearance. "I see. So it's not really about a policy, just personal politics?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral. A few guests had pulled out their phones and begun recording. The manager's face hardened. "Sir, I will have to ask you to leave." Barron paused for a long moment, his expression unreadable as he considered his options. At 18, he was learning to stand for himself as an adult in society. He could push further, escalate the situation, and turn it into a bigger spectacle. Or he could do what no one would expect and walk out gracefully. He heaved a deep breath, slowly straightened his coat, and adjusted his tie. Then, with poise and control, he picked up the hat, dusted off the brim, and placed it back on his head. "If that's how you feel, then I'll leave," he said coolly. "But just so we're clear, you're not enforcing a dress code. You're enforcing a political bias." The manager folded his arms and vaguely pointed to the door. "Call it what you want, but you need to leave if you won't take off the hat." Barron glanced at him and didn't resist. The room fell into an awkward silence as he turned toward the door, but the tension lingered as he walked out. Although some seemed to support the manager's decision, others shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with what they had just witnessed. Outside the restaurant, Barron paused momentarily, letting the cool Manhattan breeze brush against his face. He adjusted his hat slightly, reaffirming his choice to wear it, and took a deep breath. Although he was uncomfortable with everything that had just happened, he wasn't angry, maybe a little frustrated, but what he felt most was disappointment. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with murmurs. Some dinner guests called the scene a blatant display of political discrimination and an attack on free speech, while others saw it as a stunt by the young Trump trying to carve out his path in politics. Major news outlets picked up the story after some dinner guests uploaded the videos, sharing their accounts of what happened. By midnight, Barron's name was everywhere. Whether or not he planned it, the incident had thrust him further into the political spotlight. Barron stood outside the restaurant and walked a few blocks to a small public park. He took in the lively chatter in the park and wished the higher crust settings could have the same unity. Then, he found an empty bench and sat down, pulling out his phone. He texted his mother first and then to a few close friends, informing them of what had happened. He wasn't looking for sympathy, just clarity. As he sat quietly in the park, the video of Barron Trump getting evicted from the restaurant spread like wildfire, sparking polarizing discussions. It dominated trending lists on social media and flooded in comments in just a few hours. Many news outlets hurried to cover the event and weighed in on their opinions and reactions to the incident. "This is what happens in America now," a reporter on Fox News said. "If you support a certain political movement, you're unwelcome in public spaces. What happened to unity and inclusion?" Regardless of this viewpoint, there were some, particularly those in the liberal media, who had something different to say. A panel was set up on MSNBC to discuss the hot trending incident. "Businesses have policies," one guest argues. "If someone walks in wearing a highly charged political symbol, the establishment has the right to ask them to leave." However, others pushed back, pointing out the hypocrisy in the action. Would the reaction have been the same if the hat had said Black Lives Matter or Pride? The controversy isn't just about Barron. It's about freedom of speech, business roles in political conversations, and the growing polarization in American society. The debate continued online, with some supporters calling Barron's treatment unfair. They argued that he was only targeted for his last name and political associations, and not for his behavior. Still, others saw it differently, claiming that as the son of a former president he must expect scrutiny. Despite the uproar, Barron remained silent, no statements, interviews, or social media posts. Days later, as Barron scrolled through the social media reactions, an idea formed in his mind. He wasn't interested in revenge or a public feud. Instead, he saw an opportunity to highlight the importance of unity and understanding. He thought about his interactions that day, not just with the manager but also with the people watching, and considered what he could do to encourage dialogue rather than conflict. Filled with determination, he started making calls, his voice calm but filled with purpose. Hours later, he finally broke his silence on the incident, not through an interview or a social media post but through action, as he quietly purchased the property next to the restaurant. When the news went viral, the public was stunned. Most people had expected a lawsuit, a boycott, or at the very least a strong statement condemning the restaurant. But his announcement was a stark contrast. It was a simple plan: to own a high-end restaurant that would welcome all viewpoints, all people, regardless of political beliefs. Sharing in a media post, "It isn't about politics, it's about inclusion." The move shocked the media. His supporters commended him for the brilliant counterpunch. "He's not complaining, he's competing," a conservative talk show host said admiringly. "This is the American way." Even those who disagreed with his politics respected the strategic move. As a journalist wrote, "Instead of crying victim, he's creating something new." Another comment read, "So much for a neutral space. Kicking someone out isn't neutral, it's picking a side." But it wasn't just reaffirming and resonating conversations that filled the internet. Some critics were equally skeptical. "A pet project of privilege," the original restaurant's manager Richard scoffs in an interview. "Most people don't have the luxury of buying real estate just because they feel slighted." Behind the scenes, Barron's plans took shape. Investors took notice of his project, and some quietly offered financial backing. Meanwhile, the staff at Liberté could feel the tension. Regular customers canceled reservations, and the once bustling restaurant was noticeably quieter. The manager began to question his decisions. He told himself he was right, but wasn't so sure when a few of his staff resigned and joined Barron's team. The lines were drawn, but instead of escalating the conflict in the media, Barron made a surprising decision and reached out to Richard directly. Barron's invitation caught Richard off guard. He'd been bracing for legal action or public attacks and was stunned when he learned that the young Trump requested a private conversation. Although his first instinct was to refuse, the pressure from the restaurant owners and the growing negative attention made him reconsider. They met in a quiet cafe away from the media. Richard arrived expecting to meet an arrogant, entitled 18-year-old, but Barron had a different impression of tonight's meeting. He knew their meeting would not erase the incident, but he hoped they could turn their encounter into something constructive. He calmly and professionally greeted Richard, saying, "I don't want revenge, I just want to talk." Although Richard was skeptical and perplexed by his reaction, he listened. He told Barron why he reacted so strongly to the MAGA hat. sharing that he'd lost his restaurant in his hometown years ago due to political protests. His outrage wasn't against him personally, but against conservative policies. "I built that place from nothing," Richard said bitterly, and then, just like that, it was gone. To him, MAGA wasn't just a political slogan, it was a reminder of his loss, and seeing Barron wear that hat in his restaurant triggered painful emotions he hadn't dealt with in years, leading to his outrage. Barron listened without interrupting, sympathizing and taking in the weight of Richard's pain. In a way, he understood. When Richard finished talking, Barron took a moment before responding. "I get it," he finally said. "I know what it's like to have people judge you for something you didn't choose." Richard was surprised by Barron's response, and for the first time that evening, he started to see Barron as more than just Trump's son, but a symbol of future conservatism. Barron opened up about his struggles, sharing stories about how difficult growing up in the spotlight was for him. He told Richard that he's always been seen as an extension of his father rather than an individual, which made him choose to stay out of politics largely. "I didn't ask to be in politics," he said. "I didn't choose my last name, but no matter what I do, people see me as a symbol instead of a person." As he listened on, something shifted, and Richard's beliefs that Barron was just another privileged elite using his wealth to get what he wanted changed. He now saw a young man who, despite his advantages, carried his burdens. For the first time, Richard questioned whether he was right to throw Barron out. However, Barron didn't ask for an apology. Instead, he simply said, "I hope at some point you'll come to my restaurant and see what I'm trying to do." For a moment, Richard was perplexed by Barron's statement. It sounded like Barron was offering him a job, but as generous as this offer was, he wasn't certain if he wanted to work with the young Trump, but he decided to give it some thought. Their conversations continued until Richard was finally sold on the idea. They agreed to keep their meeting away from the public until the grand opening. Some days passed, and Barron finally announced a date for the restaurant's grand opening. But to everyone's surprise and failed expectations, Richard didn't speak out against it again. When asked about the incident, he simply said, "I've moved on." Conversations sparked about Richard's silence over Barron's restaurant's grand opening as news outlets reported the incident again. The media reacted quickly, giving both passionate and polarizing inputs. Some took shots at Richard's silence, arguing he should have weighed the situation deeply before turning a harmless appearance into such a heated, politically charged moment in controversy. However, a few hours before the grand opening, Barron released another statement that shocked and provoked the public, announcing that the head chef at his restaurant was Richard. One comment showed displeasure over Trump's announcement. "Why would you partner with someone who criticized your family? This feels like a betrayal. Your father stood against these people, and now you're breaking bread with them?" Another added, "Richard is selling out. How can he work with someone who carries the Trump name? This is just an attempt to rehabilitate the Trump image. We're not buying it." The media erupted once again, sparking outrage over their alliance. Most people who had followed their story wanted to see who would come out victorious and who would be criticized and bashed by the public, not a partnership. Political commentators debated the restaurant's true intentions. Late-night hosts joked about whether the menu would be half MAGA, half woke. Even some of Barron's supporters distanced themselves from the project, fearing the backlash. Despite the negativity, Barron and Richard pressed forward. Although he understood the criticism, he believed his mission to unite people and foster local engagement was more important. The protests eventually died down, but the anticipation increased, which was soon replaced by curiosity. Some decided to stop by just to see what the young Trump built. The next morning, the quiet block before Liberté began to transform. Trucks unloaded some dining sets and decorations, and waitstaff and busboys set up tables, banners, and a small stage. Barron stood at the center of it all, overseeing the arrangements. The banner above the stage read in bold letters, 45 and Company. After his meeting with Richard, Barron reached out to several organizations that focused on community building, dialogue facilitation, and the food and healthcare department. Barron had always been viewed through the lens of his family name. To the world, he was nothing but the son of a divisive president, but as he stepped into adulthood, he longed to define himself by something other than his lineage. This was seen as his influence over younger voters was already discussed among Republican circles. However, that's where the idea for 45 and Company was born. It was more than just a restaurant, it was a statement. Although it was a subtle nod to his father, it also stood for something deeper. The young Trump aimed to create a space where people from different walks of life could unite, despite living in an era of extreme division. His concept was built on the simple idea that food has the power to bring people together. Later that morning, the sidewalks were lined with media personnel, television channels, and a curious crowd of families, young professionals, and activists eager to be the restaurant's first guests. But could Barron, a Trump, really be the one to execute such a leap for political tolerance across a divided nation? Communal tables were replaced with traditional two-seaters, subtly encouraging conversations among strangers. The walls were adorned with local artists' art, celebrating the community's diversity of voices. The press had gathered. Influencers streamed their first impressions, and then Barron took the microphone to address the audience. His voice was steady but filled with emotion. "A few days ago, I was asked to leave Liberté restaurant because of a hat. That's okay. I respect the manager's decision to maintain a neutral environment in the restaurant." Although his actions sparked a lot of controversies, what struck me wasn't just being turned away, it was the bigger picture. We've become so quick to judge each other, to take sides, to shut down conversations. That's not who we are. We can do better. The crowd erupted in applause, and Barron continued, "This grand opening is not about me, and it's not about them. It's about all of us finding ways to listen, to understand, and come together. It pleases me to announce that Richard will be heading this restaurant. Thank you for being here and proving that unity is stronger than division." The applause was louder this time, and Barron stepped off the stage and cut the ribbon, officially opening the restaurant. As the crowd rushed into the restaurant, the biggest surprise came. The food was incredible. Even the critics, many of whom came intending to bash the menu with negative reviews, admitted that the chef had crafted an exceptional menu. A New York Times critic wrote, "I came expecting a political gimmick. Instead, I found a restaurant that delivers an exceptional dining experience. Whatever your stance on the Trumps is, this place is undeniably worth a visit." Word spread quickly, but more importantly, a vision was achieved. At that moment, something unexpected started to happen. Strangers from different backgrounds were seated at communal tables, discussing political divisions and unity over a shared meal. However, just when people thought they had figured Barron out, he made another move no one saw coming. A week after his restaurant opened, news broke that Liberté had been sold, and to everyone's surprise, the buyer was Barron Trump. The media ran wild with speculation. Some assumed he was planning to expand 45 and Company into a franchise. Some still held on to controversial thoughts, believing it was an act of revenge to erase Richard's past. However, it was soon discovered that it was neither. Barron had defined himself again by establishing the space as a shelter and food kitchen for the homeless. The place that once stood as a division against political beliefs was now a refuge for those with nothing. The public was stunned. Even his harshest critics struggled to find a reason to condemn the move. As several news outlets carried the discussions, the incident finally got to CNN, where one of their news anchors shared his input during a discussion on the shelter's grand opening. "No matter how you feel about the Trump name, this is an undeniably selfless act. It's not something you'd expect from someone raised in wealth." This comment, along with several others, changed the media's narrative. Barron was no longer just Donald Trump's son. He was now seen as his man, proving himself and carving his path. A few days after the shelter was opened, Barron decided to visit the restaurant again. He sat at a corner table, watching the lively and easy chatter among dinner guests from different backgrounds. He didn't need recognition. The smiles, the clinking of glasses, and the mingling of people who, just weeks ago, might have avoided each other was more than enough. As he picked up his wine, Richard walked over. He took off his name tag and sat across from Barron. A small moment of silence passed between them before Richard smiled. "Dinner's on me," he said. Barron smirked, nodding in quiet appreciation. As the camera pulled back, the restaurant remained alive with conversation. The world outside was still divided, still noisy. But here, inside 45 and Company, something different was happening, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like hope. What started as a confrontation over a political statement transformed into something far greater. Barron Trump walked into the restaurant as a symbol, but he walked out as a man determined to redefine his narrative. Instead of choosing retaliation or outrage, he chose a different path, proving that it was never just about a hat. What do you think? Can conversations and open-mindedness truly break down walls? Can businesses remain politically neutral, or will they always be influenced by societal and political divisions? What would you do when faced with division? Drop your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe to our page. Before you go, click on the next video below.